And we are live. Okay, I'm just gonna wait for a couple of people to connect, which is always weird when you play this afterwards, because then there's a silence that happens. Let's just wait a bit, and also just to get a heads up for whether or not the audio is fine. Let me switch this off. Yeah, and we are definitely live, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our fourth and last episode of our live series. If you are joining us for the first time, I don't know where you have been, but we are also very grateful to host you in this particular conversation. So we've had 3 of these already. The first one was with Hotlines, which is an NPO that recently undertook a research project looking at the landscape of fatherhood in South Africa, which is exactly what I'm doing, but I'm doing it through conversation instead of the extensive research, amazing research that they did, actually. I spoke to the program manager, Pamela Khare, and we had a research-based, but also a very personal conversation about fatherhood, because we are both girls that grew up in the absence of our fathers. So that was a really powerful conversation, mixing statistics and real life. And then we also hosted 3 of my dad friends, Usanele, Lee, and Tapelo, who are beautiful. I always call them beautiful Black present fathers, and they were sharing their perspective of fatherhood, how they've navigated it, particularly as Black men, because our circumstances are very different. And then 2 weeks ago, I had my 3rd conversation with some sisters, and we basically spoke about the concept of single mothers, looking at absent fathers versus absent present fathers, because it's not just like a single view of just the concept of absent fathers. So today's one is also a very interesting one, because I thought it would be really nice to take the conversations that we've taken and just speak to a professional about it, just from a personal perspective. Maybe he's got some personal stories to share, but also from a very professional mental, psychological perspective, because a lot of what happens in our lives is very psychological. We know the stuff that happened to you as a child have a way of showing up when you are an adult. So that's how I wanted to look at the psychology of fatherhood, again in Black communities in particular, because if you look at the stats, houses that are without fathers are predominantly houses in Black communities. We grew up with so many matriarchs leading homes. So we're just gonna get into the conversation of understanding why. So I just need a heads up from someone to tell me if the audio is okay, because the last time we had this live series audio on Facebook, I think there were troubles that side. So I just want to know if everything is cool before I introduce our guest today. I'm just gonna check the Facebook stream as well, see if we are well on that side. Just wanna, oh, sorry. Okay, cool. Seems like everything is running fine. So my guest today is a professional in the space, Benedict Mhlongo. So I'm just gonna introduce him. So he originally stems from Vryheid, situated in the northern KZN, a small town that means freedom. His African name, Kulego, which also means freedom, has propelled him and liberated him to be a compass and enabler to encourage others in defining and celebrating their own freedom through mental health. Amidst society, he holds a ball of performativity, occupying roles such as psychologist, lecturer, community activist, and PhD candidate, academically and clinically trained at the University of the Witwatersrand. A large amount of us affectionately know him as Dr. Better, and he always loves saying B, and it's, I think, just B, like those two, alphabets together are actually really powerful. So, ladies and gentlemen, please help us welcome Dr. Better.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Lovely introduction. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for the invite, actually.
Yes, I'm so excited to have you. So excited to have you. And also honored. I know with you guys, time is money. Conversations are not cheap, eh?
This is a very much needed conversation.
Yes, for sure. And I think I didn't realize the magnitude of the campaign until I started it. Until women and men started sharing their stories about their fatherhood wound. I was like, yo, I'm so glad. I'm so glad I allowed myself to be a vessel to drive the conversation. I'm so glad I used the platform for this because, yeah, it's much needed. And as much as this is the last conversation, I'm hoping in other ways the conversation can continue, because the more we talk about it, the more we also unearth some stuff that we have to deal with, particularly as Black people. We've got stuff, man, We've got a lot of stuff that I really hope we can deal with. So thank you so much for this. Maybe let's start there. Why do you think this particular conversation is such an important one in our current society?
Thank you so much for that. Very, very. Oh, you're throwing me under the bus already. I like that. So let's already do this, eh?
Yes, let's go.
No, I feel like it's a very, very, very contextually based one that's actually quite needed. Because, I mean, if you look at the youth and look at how the structure, the current state of how things are actually happening in this country, or even in society, even our communities that we come from, actually, you actually see that there's a lack of that parental figure, which is actually the father. Reimagined in the sense that in community, a lot of people actually tend to see that, no offense, not to be sexist also, is that mothers play a very pivotal role. No offense. We understand that that's very important and we pay much tribute to them. But the fathers are also needed, not only in a sense of security type of figure, but also in a very type of the only way they know how is to be fathers. I mean, look at how kids are sometimes actually raised. For instance, if that is, that's a very, and then the child maybe later on, for instance, let's take that and the absence of that particular comment to say that and then there's a child that actually later grows up without actually having that cautionary factor actually being pivotal in their lives. All of those other things that are actually not quite good into the society. So fathers, not only they play a very disciplinary type of role, but there's also a way of actually learning about life. Because remember, children learn to understand the world through their parents. So father also brings in a different type of perspective to how this is actually life should be, and the mother also. But the father is not to say that is more important to say, but here are the values and characteristics that they actually bring in that dynamic. To say that, listen, as a father or as a man, there's a lot of masculinity also that is placed into that. Not hegemonic, not toxic one, but one that is actually very nurturing, one that is also very providing and securing. So we need to understand that, and this topic is very much important to actually learn to differentiate between this is the role of the mother, but also it's also important as the father's role. So the lack, the absence of that causes a lot of disruption in society.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. Particularly because I always think about just the biology and the science of creating a human life. Women are amazing. Women are the backbones of society. I mean, I carry the child within my body, but there was a contribution of a man. So just based on that, just by virtue of that, I've always really believed that it takes both parties to contribute towards the development of the human that they created. I remember seeing an article once from a guy who wrote a column for a publication to say, listen, yes, we have absent fathers, but let's rather focus our energies on focusing on the single mom, on how to strengthen and empower her. And I don't disagree with that. I don't disagree with that. I mean, single
Mhm.
moms, that's a reality for so many women in society. But also, maybe we really shouldn't have a phenomenon like that. Like, let's deal with that. Let's deal with the root causes of why we have single mothers. And maybe that's a way for us to move forward as a society, with that family unit, where there's a mom and a dad. And some
Mm.
situations are obviously very impossible. I'm also not saying women must stay in abusive relationships for the sake of the unit, but also
Mhm.
when circumstances allow us, I think it's so important for us to try and work together to build this family, not for the sake of us, but for the sake of the people we're raising. Because I think in Black communities, I always call absent dads a Me Too campaign. Because in my small
Oh,
circle of friends, there's so many of us that don't have dads, like
mm,
that
mm,
didn't grow up with dads. And it just tells you how prevalent that reality is for us. And I'm doing this because I'm hoping there'll be a generation of
mm.
fathers that of children that don't have to grow up the way we did,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
So I definitely agree with that. So in your professional opinion, the work that you've done, the research that you've done, why do you think it's still so bad in Black communities? Why do you think we still have such a high number? I mean, even the current stats are still showing, like worldwide, we have 10 to 40% of households living without fathers. But in South Africa, it's like more than 50%, and majority
Yeah.
of those are in Black families. Why is that the case? Like, what happened, or what is happening in the minds of fathers? Like, what is going on that we are not seeing, in the surface?
Mm, 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 mm. But yeah, that's a very important question. As I was just busy with this research and campaign, I mentioned that I'm gonna need to touch on a few school of thoughts actually, but not only just one school of thought in terms of psychology. So you're gonna have to forgive me because I also come from a very sociology type of perspective, and it's also gonna be I wouldn't be doing it justice if I went if I did not need to actually go back in terms of actually
Yeah.
industrialization. So let's look at back in terms of actually how townships were created, in terms of the system back then. So the father was actually known as, for instance, they fathered a few kids. For instance, the mother was also left behind to actually play a very nurturing and rearing type of role, where the father actually go to Gauteng, where the gold was actually at. So they came here to the city of gold, they mined, they mined, they mined. They came back actually to just bring money. So that performativity also created in them a role of carrying in a sense that they're providing. So for them, it was more providing of monetary values. Where the mother's like, well, I'm left with this children, I'm left with this family that actually is needed to actually, I need to ensure that they are very much protected, nurtured, and also loved. But the father, what actually they let it December, I come back, January, I leave. I need to work the whole. But what also was very important that happened in that area, whether it's actually the first or the second industrial revolution, was that fathers were actually, we're seeing more fathers coming to Joburg, contracting what we know, come to know is HIV. They started actually deteriorating and actually dying and dying and dying. That's the first type of way we saw fathers actually being absent. And then mothers actually then turned into, this was the introduction of domestic workers. So they actually later then had to come to Joburg and work in the households of white people and actually as domestic workers. But not only did that actually remain as them actually being domestic workers, that informal type of psychotherapy also started, where you still find them now, where domestic workers are held it up in corners where it's a Randburg or something. That is therapy for them. They sit together and say, "Eh, mntanam, eh, ubaba mntanam uyagula." So that for them was another therapy that they actually saw. But later now, actually bringing to now what we term or what we see in my profession in terms of psychology, the absence or the limitation in terms of father figures or their presence is also coming from or derived from a sense of fathers not wanting, I wouldn't say not wanting to commit, but not wanting to ensure their presence actually maintained. So for them, it's they have this thing of I'm slowly going to wither away because of my grandmother, so because of my grandfather, how long they stayed in this life, how long they stood in this age. So we have this inferiority complex that actually tells us that, listen, you're not going to live long in life. So you can actually go around a lot of men. A lot of men actually fear death to a point where you think about it so many times to a point where they're like, okay, it's not going to happen. So again, in the school of thought of psychology, we have what we call the Oedipus complex, where the daughter who's black has a fixation on the father. Sigmund Freud called them sexual frustrations, but which was just energies. And then the boy child had a sexual frustration to the mother. So the boy child, don't get me here actually, the boy child saw the father as a competitor to the mother. The boy child always wanted to be with the mother. They wanted the attention. Hence, single mama's sport. We want attention from our mothers all the time. And then the
Yeah.
father will also be competing. So the competition that existed between me and my father later then transpired to saying that, listen, I'm always going to make sure that I come number one. So later in life, for most people who have insecurities are actually boys other than women, actually. So that on its own created that complex where now the girl child who happens to be black is actually wanting to see a father figure in the men that they actually date. So in all
Mm,
relationships, we're all looking for a sense of home. And then for us, the sense of home, which actually is contact, is actually our parents, which is the father. The father was protecting. The father would normally come out and ensure, the father would ensure that I have everything for school, school trips or anything. The father provided. So therefore, I later actually learned in life that, listen, this is how a man actually is. This is how it's actually structured. But fathers, again, have this inferiority complex of saying that I am going to wither away. I'm not going to last. I'm not going to live long to see them, whether it's actually in 21st or anything. So with them, mundane, ordinary life duties is actually a factor that actually kills them most of the time. So that is
sure.
another complex that is actually causing them not to be remain or not to be present.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I'm thinking about the part of men actually experiencing more insecurities than women, right?
Mhm.
Because the prior conversations that we've had, and we just said that now, that our history has kind of perpetuated the idea that the father is the provider.
Yes.
And the research that Hotlines did, when it looked at how men define and women, how they define fatherhood, it has a lot to do with financial provision.
Mhm.
And I mean, sorry, I think someone is awake. Excuse me, just a second.
No problem.
Sorry, I'm back. Motherhood duties.
Yeah, yeah.
So when they define it as financial provision, then a guy that's not working, would they then be experiencing those insecurities about whether or not they'll be able to provide for their families? And do you think that kind of insecurity then plays so much in their head that they actually decide to step back to say, actually, I can't do this. That plays a
Because
big
I'm sure of viewers out there, for instance, if they when they heard that I'm saying guys are more insecure, they're like, rubbish, rubbish. But they're more insecure in that element actually to say that the inability to provide, the inability to actually state that, listen, my presence in fatherhood is actually to provide. So they embed their presence into providing monetary values in a sense that I'm working, therefore I provide. I find most men in most marriages to say that, but my partner's complaining about my presence or anything that I'm not there. But I mean, the lights are on. We're watching TV together, so it means we're spending time. So it's very minute to that point where we're not seeing the bigger picture as men. So our insecurities are around that. Like for instance, if your partner is actually cheating or anything, your first thing you think about, so I'm not good enough, which is
Mm.
actually in both elements in women and men. But it's the element of you feeling like you're not good enough. But for us, society has turned out in a very uncautious level to say that, listen, our ability to be men and to constantly define ourselves is based on if we can the ability to provide. So if you can't provide, so therefore you're not a father. Even at home, you can go now. They find that they actually say that, but why are you having kids? Are you able to provide? And even when it comes to birth control or any parenting planning or any facility, they actually ask you in terms of your finances. Is it going to be enough? Are you going to be able? Because I mean, children require a lot apart from health. Actually, there's a lot of money that is actually taken out, whether it's school or anything. But the ability or the inability to provide is very much embedded in how men define themselves.
Yeah, sure. That's so true. And I think what we kind of need our generation, the next generations to do is we can still call the father a provider, but I think there's so much more that they can provide just outside of money, right? And I get that it's such an important part of raising a child. Like, I mean, money is really important, but I think there's also more to a child. Sometimes a child doesn't need yoga. Sometimes a child just needs time, And and I think what hurts me now is, and I've seen it a lot. I don't know if you've seen the trend on social media. There's a lot of guys now that are coming out to speak against their exes, the mother of their kids, because they've been running back and forth from courts, because the woman is saying they're not providing, and in the meantime, they are trying to do so much to provide for their kids. But because it's like too little, then you blocked access from your children. And I think that's the difficult part. Is even now as a woman, if I feel like a guy is not coming through to the plate financially whenever I need the money, then I feel like I have the right to totally block access. And I think that's the part that agitates me a little bit, because I feel like sometimes we kind of fixate on the wrong stuff. Just to say it's just the money. So at what extent do you think society is also perpetuating the idea of just fatherhood being just a provision of money instead of anything else? Because I think society also plays a big part in helping men define what fatherhood actually is.
The problem is what society does is that it sees that, for instance, if a father is present, it sees that as, even other men actually, we see that as a challenge. I mean, what is wrong with this guy? Why is he so right? Why is he doing everything accordingly? So society, what society has actually accustomed us to see is that fathers are actually meant to be in shebeens. They're meant to be in corners actually. They're meant to actually not being present, or not even know what their child is doing great what, or which languages, or which even whatever modules that they're actually doing. So that is what society has painted the black man to actually be. Whether they're gonna actually end up being in jail, or doing illegal stuff, that's what it exactly is, or having multiple children with different actually mothers. So society is very, it's actually a very an unconscious level of in that regard, and also warrants us to be loyal to that unconsciousness, to say that, so this is actually this. So society really contributes to that, to a point where you don't even want to invest time. You see time as something that's not actually tangible to your child if you invest it. But whereas if you can't afford anything in that regard, but I mean, time is the only thing that you can give. So therefore, be present. So presence is very also multi-layered, to a point where people just mentioning right now in terms of society, we need to provide, but actually presence is also time. The fact that I'm actually taking time to actually speak to you, even if the mother's calling me to reprimand you, I'm taking the call, I'm actually taking initiative to say, son or daughter, this is how life actually is. This is how things should actually be.
Yeah.
And let me teach you about certain things. Let me teach you about this or that. But let me allow you the ability to feel liberated to take your own decisions. So society, before any other form of other school of thought, comes first to actually defining what actually a father actually is.
But sometimes even an absent father can actually, a present father in the home can actually be regarded as an absent father. Because when the kids need time, he just does not have it.
He's working, he's coming back late, he's like, no, but I need to provide for you. But kids do not even care who's paying school fees for you. They just want somebody to be present. I mean, most of us actually, I'm sure this is a part of the Me Too campaign, is that we can't remember where in the parents' evening or parents' meeting where both our parents were present. It's always been the black mother who's always been there constantly throughout all the meetings, checking out and knowing exactly what is actually that you are doing. So fathers are not, they're quite absent. They either pass away from a very tender age, that I feel like that's another thing that we need to investigate later. It's not been included in the DSM-5, but I feel like men who have fathers who've actually passed away at a very tender age, for them to even have a relationship, they tend to actually have the same later in life, to fear that they're not also going to live past 21 of their sons or their daughters. So they have this innate fear that they're also going to deteriorate in life and they're not going to be present. So that what also happens that in the very subconscious level is that it's making them detach. It's making them not want to invest their presence in time because they know like my father, my own father actually never present till this very day. So who I am is not attributed to a person that I do not know. So it may be an attribute of how society has sheltered me. Because in as much as society is better, society is also very much a place of refuge for other people to actually find a home and also an identity. So through it all, it's also creating that identity of your own self. So identity is very much of a thing that surfaces all over here.
Sure. I
All
love
right.
that. Okay, so three things I wanna touch on. But firstly, and from what you just said, so firstly, I want to look at the cycle of fatherlessness, right?
Mhm.
So for a guy that grew up without a father, if they don't make, and correct me if I'm wrong, 'cause I'm definitely talking from the perspective of a woman, but I'm assuming if they don't make a conscious or intentional decision about saying, I'm not going to be like my father, I want to build my own family.
Mhm.
If they don't make a conscious decision like that, do you think their reality or how they experienced fatherhood can directly impact their decisions on impregnating someone and just leaving? Is it easier for guys that didn't grow up with fathers to be absent fathers themselves?
You spot on actually, apart from applying a perspective that is very much embedded in femininity, but still, it's spot on. We can't negate that. Because, I mean, what happens that, for instance, one has this fear again that I call, but it's also in this regard called a learned helplessness, where you know how we are, especially South Africans, we always like the government will provide, the government will do this. So it also has that ability in terms of actually being fatherless. It can invite that feeling to say that, listen, I am my father's son. My father was a drunkard, so therefore I'm drunkard. My father was like this, so therefore it's fine. My father was never present, so I'm also not going to be present. So it makes it right in that regard to a point where it was done by my father. So how am I different to him? And
Sure.
technically, I'm his blood, so therefore it's fine. So it has a very positive effect to say that I had a fatherless childhood. So therefore, for me now to actually withdraw from that potential, what can I call it, potential role, it's very easy for me to just detach from that. Because I have this now learned senseless ability or hopelessness to say that, listen, Caesar, my father was like that. So I don't think I need to change the narrative. But we found other people, I don't know how it happened, but in my case, just a personal reflection is that I think I lost my father at the age of 8. He was shot, wrong place, wrong time. I was playing at home. I remember my cousins coming, running. Hey, Nkule, Nkule, Nkule. You already introduced me with my other name. So they came to me actually telling me, your father's passed away. Your father was shot. I'm like, what? My father's shot. I saw him just now. That's impossible. So being a kid, being a boy, because you're told that blood is great. I want to see blood. I want to see all of those things. So we're rushing there to my grandmother's home just to see. I want to see him lying down, just to prove to myself that he's actually been shot. They haven't told me that he's passed away. So I get to my grandmother's house. It was just a catastrophe. I can't take that image till this very day. Mother was on the floor. I think she was fainting. There was a lot of people. There was a lot of community. It was just a scene actually. But she wasn't. He wasn't shot at home. He was shot at this other pub actually. Two people actually fighting, and then he got shot. Actually, it was a straight bullet. It died instantly on the scene. So I later grew up to say that. So I did not have that father, but I then actually came to understand my father through people who actually stopped me along the road. So with this particular conversation, I found it was actually quite. I found it very important to actually share that the role of also stepfathers, because I had a stepfather. I have a stepfather who actually stepped up. Who, if I were to tell you that, listen, that's my stepfather, you'd be surprised, you'd be shocked. Because what happened, even my own very claim names, I was taught outside through my late father's friends. So they'd stop me, they'd tell me that your father loved you. He would actually take you everywhere and everywhere. So that gave me comfort to know that, listen, in as much as I never got to know him, but I knew that he loved me actually. That very same day that he passed away, he told me that he's not afraid of death and I shouldn't fear death. And then that's the very same day he actually passed away. So I grew up later in life resenting the person who did that. And also, I took the conscious decision to never actually touch alcohol because he loved alcohol. So I felt like I'm gonna die if I drink because I'm gonna go to these places also. So I took that decision to say I'm not gonna do that. But later on, I took another conscious decision to ensure that the day I become a father, I'm gonna make sure that I'm present. First hockey or tennis or cricket or soccer match, I'm there. Because my father, I never had that. So I constantly had that in my head later moving forward to say that I lost a father, but it's okay. I had an amazing uncle whom I lost last year also. October, this day actually, 16th of October 2019. Yeah, so he stepped up. He was an amazing uncle. I loved him a lot. He was great. But we need to understand that the role of other people taking those roles of the absent fathers. So they can be absent through death. They can actually be absent through their own decisions or their inability to actually perceive that this is a role that is actually worth playing. So it's not all bad. Some actually are misfortune in terms of God's plan or any other divine plan that was actually put in place. So I am only told that my father's son, through the way that I look, through the way that I talk in gestures, that gives me a sense of hope, a sense of warmth to know that he's there, he's always there, and he was an amazing man. So that for me was quite positive in that regard.
Thank you for sharing that personal story with us. That's very beautiful. And I think you touched on an important part, but I think the power we hold as Black people is blended families. We've always looked at it as like, oh, but for us, it's actually our power because now you were able to have father figures through that. Because sometimes we can have an absent father, but we can have a father figure, and they can't replace. No one can replace your father. But they can play a powerful role of a male figure in your life and still give you that sense of security and still give you a point of reference to how you would like to navigate life as a young boy. So I think that's really, really powerful. But do you think it's possible? I'm asking this because I was watching a live stream, Massive Metro, I think, this past week where they were talking about just being a Black man, and one of the guests was talking about he also didn't have a great relationship with his father. So he was also making a very conscious decision, but saying it over and over again in his head to say, I don't want to be like my father. I don't want to be like my father. I don't want to be like my father. But do you think sometimes men can fixate on that so much that they become exactly who they said they didn't want to?
Yeah, it's throwing upon energies that you don't want, but you actually want them. The idea of the mind that you are fixated on something, it means you're thinking about it. For instance, you'd find that that person is even dreaming about his father. I mean, it's that ideal fixation that later transpires into a very unconscious level, and then comes to the subconscious. You ask yourself, "But why am I thinking about this? Why is this still happening?" It's because it's actually been embedded in so much in the long-term memory that it's always coming and surfacing and surfacing. You find that you told yourself that, okay, I'm not going to speak about this anymore, but why am I still thinking it? It's because the mind sees things. For instance, I'm going to see outside a male walking his son. I'm like, father, but I'm not actually instantly, it's not making sense at that time or bringing light in that sense. But to also just mention something is that I feel like even the term father is very loosely used amongst other terms in society. The word or the idea of what father actually is one that cannot actually be solely described or defined in one term or one say. But it's also an ideal that is actually very embedded in performativity. How can I see that you are a father? What is it that attributes to you, even defining yourself to say, I see, I observe a Black father. What is actually in that to say that this is a father? Does he need to walk me to school? Does he need to give me my first boxes? What is it that he actually sees that I can actually, or the type of language or the type of conversation that we have that defines a father? So I feel like we need to reimagine, reinvestigate in terms of what it means to be a Black father, particularly, because I feel like it's drawn very much in Western paradigms. So fatherhood or the idea of fatherhood in us is still very much loosely used because you get single mothers who are saying that, or even when it's Mother's Days, you get people say that my mother is my father and my mother. So what is a father actually? What are we then actually to saying to come to understand that? So this is actually how or what a father actually is. Do we speak about, I don't know, Bruce Lee movies or Chuck Norris? So that's a father, or we can get that anywhere from, as we mentioned, a lot of people can pay those figures. So I think we need to thoroughly do an investigation to understand what it means to be a black father.
I love that. And I also love that we have a generation that I think is more open to that,
Yeah.
because I've seen us question a lot of stuff. I think Power Talk last week was talking about indaba yenhlawulo, right? And I mean, that's a very traditional thing, and we can be very traditional people. But I was very fascinated at how people were actually challenging the idea of intlawulo, particularly in 2020, with our unemployment rate being where it is, and all of that. So I think, and I'm speaking to that because I'm alluding to the fact that we are the generation that's trying to redefine, to say, listen, sometimes the guy is earning 3.5 a month, so you really can't give you the 20 grand that you're looking for. So let's look at our different circumstances and see how we can define it for ourselves, and not completely get rid of the tradition, because I think that's how we lose ourselves as a people, once we move away from traditions like that. But also we can stick to those traditions, but let's look at case by case, because it's no longer the time when our parents were falling pregnant and those things were being done. Life wasn't easier back then, but it was much easier than it is right now.
True.
So we are really questioning some things. We're sitting back to say, maybe this isn't working. Let's see how we can kind of readjust it to fit our time. So I really like you saying that we really need to redefine what does it mean to be a black father. Let's talk on the subject. Let's talk on the subject of identity, because I think this is a big part of fatherhood, particularly as Black people, because in the Black culture, paternity is so important. I wanted to start a series before I did this one, of reviewing episodes ze Khumbule Ekhaya. No, Utatako. That's the one that deals with fatherhood. Because every time I look at those episodes, I look at it from a very different perspective of like feeling bad for whoever is there. But for me, what always rings to my head is, this is a 40-year-old man, 40-year-old Black man who's looking for his father. He's got 2 kids. He's been to jail a couple of times. He says his into for his kids are not coming together. He says he's got this bad luck, and he's accrediting all of that to this man that he's never met in his life. And I think that and the episodes are repetitive. I only did one review because I looked at the other episodes, and the same themes kept coming up, of like adults coming back and saying, "Yo, I need my dad. Like, I need to get married." So lobola needs to be done in the right way, because when it's done on the maternal side, for us, it doesn't have the same thing, you know? So the themes are very repetitive. And you look at the 40-year-old guy who says he ended up in jail. And when you ask him why, he's like, no, when I was growing up and I was a kid, I wanted belonging. And because I didn't have my father with me, I associated myself with older men, but they were like street smart. So they took me in and I felt at home, but they were actually taking me the wrong direction. But at the time, I was not aware of that, because I had that sense of belonging. That for me was a kind of identity. So what then is the role of the father in terms of shaping that, particularly with us, the simple stuff like having his surname, and just knowing Gucci, this is my father. How important do you think the belonging and the identity part is plays a big role in the development of umntana?
No, spot on actually. So let me just try and actually speak to this in a very, very slow. Oh, let me drink my water also.
Yeah.
Looking at the very psychosocial development stages of actually a child, is that from ages from 0 to 4, all they're fixated about, hence we call that the oral stage. It's all about sucking. So everything is with the sucking. And who does that for me actually? So it's all about the sucking, the crying. When I cry, mommy comes. When I suck, mommy is actually assisting me in terms of feeding me. So I'm more fixated on the mother actually in terms of actually growing, in terms of being very much secure. So I then later become a toddler and everything. So toddler phases or toddler phase up until adolescence phase is actually the identity creation phases, where I'm now actually later to I'm learning of the world, and in learning of the world, I'm actually learning the major important factor there is actually coming off, creating that identity for myself. So identity, its essence, or what's embedded in identity, is actually what we call a point of reference. So identity needs to have a point of reference. Who actually best to actually give me that is my father. So this is how we do things at home. So this is how he is. I mean, he walks with so much character. Look at him; he's very charismatic. Actually, the type of music he listens to, what he plays. So when he plays this, mommy becomes happy. So therefore, I want to aspire to that. I want to do certain things. I want to actually ensure that I am in my father's footsteps. So that particular stage is from toddlerhood until adolescent phase is actually the phase where I'm creating identity. When I'm coming off, I see my father. I see someone who's actually present. But imagine now that there's an absence in that. I'm coming off. I see other things. So this is maybe whether it's actually group of kids where you're into crime, you're mugging people and stuff. So that's actually how it's actually done. So therefore, let me follow those paths. So we need a point of reference in terms of identity. So the father, if the father is present, trust me, we have the thing as sons to actually aspire to our fathers and to actually be our own role models, which is actually based on our father's point of reference. So how our father asked, imagine myself also, even though he was absent, but I learned of stories about him. So I was like, actually, I want to be like him, only based on the positive place that I actually listen. So the point of reference is actually the identity that one creates. So imagine now that you are now in Soweto where the crime is rife. People are actually not much embedded. We don't have access to, which is speaking to also a class. I come from a very working class family where there's maybe a domestic worker or there's a teacher or there's a police officer. So we all come from that narrative, which is very much, very familiar type of space. So we
Yeah.
live in that narrative, but that the father is actually absent. There's no point of reference or anything. But I see older guys in my street who are in and out of prison. I'm like, this is actually cool. I want to be part of the numbers game one day. I want to do things to the community that actually sees me actually joining or jumping the ladder in terms of hierarchy and actually assisting that. So I actually want to actually see myself being a part of that. Because you're right in saying that the home, we're looking for a place that we find security at, and that's the father. So especially in the black person's life, that's very important. From ages, I can actually say from ages 5 until the ages of 18, father's presence is very important in that regard. So for me to know that I am my father's son in a very more positive light because he was present. But imagine now there's no father figure, there's no person who's playing that role, but actually I find myself with 4 sisters, with an aunt, with a grandma, with a mother, with my mother's sisters. So I'm the only son in this family. What do I do? Poverty is rife. So obviously, I don't have any point of reference to say or see anything. And education for me is like it's the long route. So therefore, let me join somebody, a place where I can find as home, outside that home, where I'm seen as a man, where I'm acknowledged. Hence come the masculinity. Hence come me seeing myself as very strong and having muscles. So it's very important to be present during those phases. Not to say that mommy is not important anymore after 5 years. She still actually is. But
Yeah.
those other, for 5 to 18, father plays a very important role.
Sure. That's powerful. I don't know which model you professionals look at when you look at psychosocial development, but I'm personally obsessed with Eric Erikson. I think that's the theory that like I
Mhm.
personally like would relate to, and I think that's the one that I use most of the time when I'm writing and listening to that, because I think those teenage year, just from tweens to teens, that's a really difficult time for
Yours,
kids.
it's bad.
I think we need to have conversations about how difficult that stage is of transitioning from just a child to now trying to define what adulthood looks like. So from a male perspective, is what does it mean to be a man, right? And if you don't
Mhm.
have that positive point of reference within your own household, it's so much easier to to let the television dictate what it means to be a man. Because we were, myself and Pam, in the first episode, she shared an astounding statistic with me. It still blows my mind that 99.9% of children in juvenile detention in the US, you can trace back to the fact that they grew up in homes without fathers. And that might seem like nothing, but I think it's such a big deal. Say that's, and it sounds so terrible, but you're like, that's why they're there. Because if they had a positive male figure in their homes, then probably their fate would have been a different one. And that's just how powerful the dad is. Because we also spoke about she's personally passionate about now trying to go into to collaborate with correctional services within South Africa to actually see how rife the issue of fatherlessness is. Because I don't think there's anyone, like I've done the research, I don't think there's anyone that's particularly undertaken that particular task to go to our jails and say, how was your relationship with your father? Because I think majority of the time you are going to find that they came from absent homes or they lived in home with violent fathers, and that becomes their point of reference. Because majority of the social ills, I think it's very easy to accredit that to lack of a positive father figure, because you leave them to define themselves and other people to dictate what it means to be a man. So I definitely think that's really important, because that's that stage of development when you're a teen. But what do boys basically go through in that stage? Like when they're teens, like what are they trying to figure out? Oh, must be so difficult.
And I'm losing you a bit, but I did get the question actually. What's happening there is that it's all about identity creation again. It's going back to that in terms of actually, I want to assert myself. They want to be more assertive. You might find that they're quite rebellious. They quite actually they don't listen, but that's actually an act or them performing their own identity in terms of actually asserting themselves to say that this is me, this is who I am, and you're not going to tell me stuff. And we always argue. It's not that I'm actually speaking back to you, but I'm actually wanting you to understand more. So it's all they always. It's very much so around the fact that they don't feel like they understood in their own households by their mothers or whatever that it is. But we also need to understand that fatherlessness or the identity of fatherlessness is actually embedded also in the conflict of it in culture and also in society. So culture is normally traditional. Society is normally Western or westernized. So culture is then saying that as a Zulu man, being a father or being a man, these are the terms that you need to actually adhere to, or these are the roles that you need to perform. Look at the Xhosa culture. Actually, they go up in the mountain. They come back as men. They actualize and assert themselves as actually men. There's a whole performative ritual as a rite of passage. And society is very much embedded in the sense that it can also kill that performativity to say that, listen, you've never been there, so therefore you can't tell me nothing. Or that very essence of a boy can actually retaliate to say that, but I'm challenging that. That shouldn't be the case because I don't want to do that and I still see myself as a man. Is that only based on biological construct or societal construct? So it can also, that's the conflict that I'm speaking of. It's also embedded in culture to say that culturally, a Zulu man does this and this and this. A Zulu man needs to work and send money home. That's all they need to do, apparently, according to culture. But society now then says that that's being absent, or psychology says you're very much absent, or sociology says that you're a product of industrialization, which is the fourth, and an element of class is also embedded in that. You still see yourself as part of the working class. So that later then kills it diminishes the dreams of young boys, actually. There's a book that I read and that a quote that always resonates with me. It says, we were young with rich dreams, dreams so rich that our parents could not afford to believe in them. So we were poor with rich dreams, actually. Meaning that we all come from backgrounds of society that we are very much embedded in poverty. to a point where poverty or unemployment or inability to certain accesses that is actually seen or envisioned as a black man or a black lady. It's actually seen in blackness. So the idea of fatherlessness or the idea of fatherhood is actually in conflict with culture and also society. So that's why it's actually forever not static. Also, we can't have one definition to say that this is fatherhood.
Yeah. I think it's also, I totally agree with that. Just like I said again, the stuff that we carry, man. Because I had a fatherhood conversation with Ubamaloka Greg, and he reminded me of such a profound thing to say. Before us, there was apartheid, right?
Mm-hmm.
We cannot disregard the contribution it made on the black family, because like you said, in the first second industrial revolutions, men were taken away from their homes to go work in the cities, and
Mm-hmm.
what that then created is what I call, like, I had an article the other day calling my father a rolling stone. I'm sure he's not happy wherever he is, but
Yeah.
wherever they find themselves, that's where they create homes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that alone created um, created these fatherless homes, where we've had homes led by again matriarchs. I know a lot of women led homes. So I think those are when you talk about the legacies of apartheid, it's not enough to just talk about our crime rates. It's not enough to talk about our economical situation, but I think we also have to talk about the effects they have on black families, because then you
Mm-hmm.
had by women, and that's all guys know. So they also think, well, that's what guys do. They go in and they make a child
Mm-hmm.
and go to another house, make a child there and leave, and like we society used to perpetuate that image, and that has we've carried that for such a long time. But then it's beautiful now because we have more men talking openly about those experiences. I always say conversations start revolutions. So the more we have conversations about the traumas that we have,
Yeah.
particularly the traumas that you have. I think I've told you personally about how I think being a man is so difficult.
No, it
um,
is.
we've had the conversation because I think we go through a lot as women, but we have each other to cry. Like I can cry on my friend's shoulder to say, "Oh, I
Mm-hmm.
had such a bad week." But you guys, I don't know if you, I don't see it. I've never experienced it.
Nah, nah.
Yeah, so there's a lot of traumas that I think you refer to it as in the innate fear that a man
Mm-hmm.
has, think that they are not capable. Are you seeing a rise in the number of black men that are taking the route of dealing with their traumas, so like mental health and going to see psychologists? Is there a rise of that? Because I think that is so necessary
Mm-hmm.
for us forward.
There's definitely a rise, actually. There's definitely a huge, 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 huge rise. I'm not gonna lie, actually. I'm seeing a lot of men in therapy where I also
Hey,
need to command them and say, listen, I really appreciate the fact that you're very honest, actually, straight with me as another black man, actually. And then they're like, no, this is necessary, actually. And I felt like it's coming from far, actually. I've been actually meaning. So I'm seeing there is a rush where men are actually now consciously wanting to invest in their own personal development to a point where they want to be present, to a point where they want to be sharp, whether it's actually through work or society or even in interrelated relationships also. So I'm seeing a huge rise, but it'll be interesting to also do another study. Maybe let's go to maternity wards actually. Are they present in the labor wards and things like that? So I think we can find interesting things there also. Because I mean, we have this thing to say that no, it's taken care. Minukarabu corner she knows what
yeah,
the answer means and things like that. So we need to also challenge that also to a point where let's actually find that. So there's a lot of challenging that needs to be done us by black men also. Looking at the classroom, looking at the education sector, actually, we need to do away with this life orientation or sex education. let's call it, maybe I had this other intervention adverts. I called it Teenagers with Imagination, where from grade 10 until matric, they post pictures of what they is that they want to become later in life. For instance, if I want to be a doctor, let me draw a picture or paint a picture of being a doctor. I post it here, grade 10, grade 11, matric. I still look at that in terms of actually keeping myself motivated. Because I'm going back to the community, whether it's actually the suburbs or the township, there's a lot of influence that also happens there that can actually make me lose form and actually thought of what is it that I want to do. So that actually keeps me grounded to a point where I want to become. So we need to have such conversations. They're very important to a point where one can become conscious, where one can become present. So I love such platforms actually. Really, really
I
cool.
love that. I love that. I think it could be. I think that's very helpful. It's a very practical way of reaching of working towards reaching a goal. And I think
Yeah.
even in families, I think it could be so effective.
Yeah.
Again, the conversation. I'm always thinking about whenever you say something. I'm thinking about a conversation that I was listening to, Massive Metro, where the guest was saying, as a project manager, he starts at the end. So he looks at how I would like the project to be, and then kind of I work your way back to say, this is the kind of man and the father that I would like to be. So what is it that I have to do to really achieve that? So if you've conceptualized that, if you've seen it in your head or you see it in your drawings or whatever, then you know
Mm,
that's goal, and that's how I can kind of work towards being that kind of man. Because I don't know if guys generally think about the kind of fathers that they want to be, or we just kind of riding the wave. Because I think from a female mother perspective, I know, and it's not like I have a plan, but I know the kind of child that I want to raise, and I know the kind of relationship that I want to have with my daughter. So that's kind of helped me along the way to say, okay, so this means if I want her to be a kind of person that is able to express herself emotionally, that means right now I can't inhibit her in expressing her emotions,
yeah,
because I
yeah.
think as an adult. So I think it would actually be so beautiful and profound, if like my husband could do that, to say, this is the kind of dad that I want to be, this is the kind of relationship that I want to have with my child. So this is the kind of stuff that I have to do, because if I don't do it, then I know, okay, I'm kind of straying away from the end goal. So I love the project that you're doing with with
Mm-mm.
with the
Yeah,
kids at home.
and men, we do that actually. We do plan. It's just that it's the intervention or implementing the intervention. We know that this is the type of relationships we want to have with our daughters, with our sons. Actually, we see ourselves wearing matching t-shirts, actually supporting Kaizer Chiefs or Orlando Pirates or Sundowns. We have that also, but it's just that how to scare a man actually is that take a mirror. Actually, I always do this activity with my patients who actually happen to be black male. Just take a
Yeah,
mirror and actually point at them and see how far they run. We men are actually fearful of actually looking at themselves to say
yeah,
that, listen, these are my imperfections. This is where actually I am going wrong. So therefore, let me actually reflect and then see who I actually am. Because us men, we are always busy. Look at how we actually even dress up. It's never like slow. We're rushing. We're not present. We're not consciously present to a point where we're pausing to say that, okay, where am I gonna do? What am I gonna do if I leave the house? Am I gonna remember this? Let me write it down. But we
yeah.
are, so a mirror
Always on
helps
the
them.
move.
Yeah,
You're always on the move.
yeah. So a mirror, just give that to your husband after this. Just show him a mirror and see what he sees.
He's gonna start brushing his hair, this guy. So I want to deal with, I think, the final question. We've got a couple of minutes left. So I asked this in the prep, and I don't know if it's digressing from what we've been talking about, but I think it would be such a helpful question to address for women that are currently not living with the father of the child. We addressed this 2 weeks ago with the ladies, where we asked, what do you tell your kids? What do you tell your kids when they're not with a present father? What do you, when they ask you, like, how do you respond to that in a way that won't affect them,
Mm-hmm.
because it won't affect them, but kind of won't break them mentally. Like, how do you structure that conversation? Because it's such a difficult one.
Yeah, and a very dangerous one actually, because how I'd like to actually have you guys structure them is that it's not gonna be the same question or same answer throughout. So it's gonna be developmentally appropriate to a point where, for instance, if it's 5 or if it's 6 or if it's 7, you're always gonna say that maybe ubaba usemsebenzini, dad is at work or dad is doing this too. And then whenever they have the cognitive ability or even emotional availability also in themselves, then we can actually start having a conversation to say, no, listen, this is what happened between mommy and daddy, but this does not mean that daddy does not love you. So what women normally do is that they tend to resent the father. In them resenting the father, they don't see that it's actually one way, but they then tend to include the daughter or the son involved in their resentment. So what needs to happen is that later in life, in terms of developmental stages, we need to have different answers for different questions at all the time. But we only ask us answering the same question. Uba uyasebenza, daddy is at work, daddy is away, daddy is working, daddy, to a point where we're like, no, me and daddy never worked out. But we had a very beautiful daughter, a beautiful son, which is actually you, and daddy loves you and mommy loves you. But it's never going to be the same question, same answer throughout.
Yeah. But what age do you think then we start being like honest? Because we can only say he's at work like for so long, you know. What would you suggest in like your professional experience in terms of age appropriateness when they start asking, when do we become honest with them? When are they cognitively ready for the actual truth?
Cognitively ready is the most dangerous, yes. Teen years. That is where they can even retaliate to say, but mommy, you at fault. You chased daddy. You made daddy to leave us. I mean, we was perfectly fine when daddy was present. So, but in saying that, so, but that's the only time where they can actually cognitively, emotionally, based to actually understand what actually happened. Because they are also now experiencing other emotional connections to the opposite sex or any sex. Because I mean, society wants us to be around heteronormativity, obviously, but they are now actually learning to actually come into terms to say that. So this is how ideal relationships actually work. It's either we can actually watch a movie that actually just describes or actually speaks what is actually happening in not so many greater words if you feel like you fear that. So that can also either break the relationship between mother and daughter or mother and son, or it can actually make them bond to say that no, mommy, it's fine. I'm sorry. I could imagine now we've actually grown or how things actually were when daddy left. Because what also happens is that imagine now you are rearing a son that the father left, whether it was through abuse or anything, but it was a very ugly relationship. But then you are raising somebody who's actually every day turning to look like this father. So I can imagine the trauma that the mother actually goes through every time they see this person, but I'm meant to love this person, the younger version of this person. So I'm always in constant conflict to say that, listen, you look like him, but I love you. You're not him, I love you. You're not him, but I love you. Come back, come here. Sorry, don't do. So it's all, there's also another fight or struggle that mothers also face. So the answer will never be the same according to age and time.
Wow. But do you think there's a possibility of the kid blaming themselves to say, oh, maybe it was my fault? Because I know I was like that for some time. I carried that burden for a very long time when my dad wasn't around to say, because I learned that he left right up like shortly after I was born. So I
Oh,
carried the burden of thinking that it was actually my fault. Um,
no, no, no.
do you think that that's a prevalent thing that actually?
You can. You really can. Remember that what comes naturally to any human being is self doubt and self blame. So that's the first point of reference for us to actually have to say that. But I'm hearing stories. Mommy tell me that they were happy, they were doing this and this with daddy. I see around the house that there's still items that belong to daddy, and I'm wondering how did I actually was immersed or assimilated into this new relationship or system. So why did he leave, or why did she? Why things actually turned out the way they did? So definitely it's me. It has to be me. So I'm gonna look at me at that time. So it's easy to self-loathe to a point where you're like, I'm not good. I'm really not good. I caused my parents to separate. So it's very easy to actually blame yourself in that regard.
Sure, sure. That's powerful. I'm just gonna look at a couple of comments before we wrap it up. We've got a couple of people here that love Dr. Beta. Please make us better fathers. I hope this conversation is going to help you make you a better father. Wilson commented on the Me Too campaign. It really is though. Like I know so many. I don't know. Do you? Like I know so many people that grew up without dads. Yeah, like
a
too many.
lot.
Too many. Another glad Marindi Beta. My husband, very insightful. Thank you for watching, baby. Woo, of course, Pindi said, hey, this girl. Here's a comment there, Dr. Beta. Insightful conversation. Thank you so much, Hanyani, for joining us. Glad also said it's a very intuitive conversation, motivated to be a better dad. Yay, mission accomplished. I'm glad.
That's good.
Adele Quinn said, could you please give some light what might have been the course of kids growing up without fathers in a general perspective? I think we addressed this. It's kind of the evolution and all of that. So Adele Quinn, right after this, you must watch this again, and then it will answer your question. And then we had a comment from Facebook saying a present father can also be absent and just think because I'm providing financially, then all is good. Yeah. So we definitely touched on that to say it's way more than just about the money. You could be raking in millions and millions and millions of rands. I think the author of Phil Knight, the founder of Nike, the founder of Nike actually resented all the work that he put in because at some point he lost touch completely with his son, and it destroyed their relationship. So he had a lot of resentment with that because I mean, to build Nike is such a big, it's Nike. So he invested a lot of time in his work that he neglected the family. But I'm sure he was bringing in a lot of time in the home, but not a lot of time in the home. So time is so important. On a final note, Dr. Beta, how do you think we can move forward from this point? Do you think more Black men need to go to therapy? Do you think Black men and women need to have better conversations on fatherhood? Like, how can we move forward to creating a better future for our children?
Apart from looking at societal norms, I feel like the woman also can play a very pivotal part in terms of actually reimagining what it means to be a Black man and also just to be a father. So how we create our own institution or constitution is very much dependent on us. We shouldn't actually look forth in terms of society, what is society saying. So yesterday I had a conversation at Daily Theatre. I opened up with a quote. I said that if I do not define myself for myself, I'll be crushed into other people's fantasy and I'll be forced to live their lives through them. That is by a quote by Audre Lorde, an American philosopher. So continue to do you, continue to choose yourself in all the spaces that you find yourself to be at, and in choosing you will come light and bring light your own true identity of actually what it means to be a father. Because Nkululeko Mhlongo is a different father compared to Richard or Usenzo Smelane. So we are all different in our own, but we meet each other at the crossroads to say that, listen, I have a daughter, I have a son, how impactful that was. Because I mean, even the idea of birth, the idea of actually labor is a very traumatic experience also, not only women face, but also us that we face, whether we're there in the labor ward or not. But the mere fact that we're actually praying very hard to say that, Lord, everything should actually go well. But continue to define ourselves through our own image of our own color. We are Black, we are powerful, we are magic.
Yes, we are. That's beautiful. And I think just a final note for me is something that I strongly believe in, that your yesterday does not have to dictate your tomorrow. So we have our traumas, we have been affected mentally, we have been broken mentally, but I believe in the concept of plasticity, where we can heal mentally, so we can do the work. So if you need to do the work, come to my psychologist. His name is Benedict Mhlongo. He's pretty amazing. Go to therapy, guys. Oh my gosh, I can't emphasize this enough. Please go to therapy. It will change your life. It will change your life. There you can start dictating and defining yourself according to. So sometimes we think we are navigating life, making our own decisions, but our traumas are actually the decisions for us. So I think it's very important to put in the work. Dr. Beta?
Thank you. I just want to take a picture.
What's that?
No. I'm saying you're most welcome, ma'am. You're most welcome. This was amazing. I had so much fun.
Yes, I also had so much fun. And thank you to everyone that joined us. Please, let's continue the conversations on our different platforms. Let's talk about fatherhood. Let's talk about manhood. I won't be part of the manhood conversations because I'm not a man. But let's talk publicly. You don't have to go through things alone. Dr. Beta is here to help you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Everyone, bye.
All right. Bye.